Welcome back, sleepyhead. Or maybe it's your first time here. Either way, I'm glad you've arrived. Tell me what's your favorite way to unwind before bed. Write it below while the rain begins to fall. And if you'd like me to read to you again, just subscribe. I'll be here every night. Now, let's begin our little ritual. I don't remember exactly when I began to notice the person across the street. It wasn't a dramatic moment, no music swelling in the background, no sudden pull of attention. Just one of those quiet recognitions that slips into your routine before you realize it's happened. Every morning, around the same time, I'd open my curtains, and there they'd be on the fourth floor, second window from the left. The balcony was small, barely room for a chair and a potted plant, but they made it work. Sometimes they sat with a book, sometimes with nothing. Occasionally with a steaming mug they held in both hands, elbows on their knees, head slightly bowed. There was something peaceful about the way they occupied that space. Not distracted, not hurried. Present. I never saw them look around. Never caught them glancing at me or anyone else. They just existed there, gently, like they belonged to the morning. At first I thought it was coincidence, then a habit, then something I looked for without meaning to. I wouldn't stare. I'd just check, briefly. During that first slow stretch of the day, half asleep, barefoot, letting the light in, and there they'd be, always dressed simply, always calm, as if their stillness was something the city leaned on to stay upright. I never tried to signal them, never waved or made a show of it. It felt like that would break something, a silence that wasn't empty, just delicate. And maybe I liked the not knowing who they were, what they did, why they were always there. Some mornings they weren't, and I'd feel it in my chest. Not disappointment exactly, more like a skipped heartbeat in a melody I'd come to depend on. But they'd return, usually the next day, like the sky remembering how to be blue again. Time passed that way, quietly. Days folded into weeks, and I still didn't know their name or even their voice. But they became part of my morning just as much as brushing my teeth or boiling water for tea. It was a strange kind of company, and maybe the only kind I needed. Not conversation, just presence. Someone else out there, sitting in silence, holding a warm cup, reminding me I wasn't the only one trying to begin the day slowly. I started timing my curtain drawing without meaning to. Made sure I was there by 7:42, when the morning light first reached their railing. If I was late, I'd feel off balance all day, not because I'd missed them, but because something steady had been missed inside me. I didn't speak about them to anyone. Didn't mention the balcony or the books or the slowness of their posture. Some things feel more real when kept unshared. Like if you say them out loud, they might dissolve. And truthfully, I liked keeping that thread of stillness to myself, like a secret between me and the sky. Until one morning, something changed. A shift, not loud, but unmistakable. I drew the curtains, expecting the same quiet figure, but the balcony was empty, and instead, taped gently to the outside of the glass, fluttering just slightly in the breeze, was a piece of paper. White, A5, handwritten, facing outward, meant to be seen, and in that instant, something inside me leaned forward. little closer, a little more awake. It took me longer than it should have to read the note. Not because it was far, my window faced theirs directly, and the paper had been taped to the inside of the balcony door's glass. But I stood there, motionless, for what felt like minutes, just staring at the handwriting, as if reading it too quickly would ruin something sacred. Eventually, I leaned in, squinting slightly through the morning light. The message was simple, just 6 words. You see me, I see you. No name, no context, just that. I read it 3 times, each slower than the last, and then I stepped back, unsure of what to feel. It wasn't intrusive. It didn't feel like someone watching me without permission. It felt gentle, like someone knocking on the door of something we'd both been tiptoeing around for weeks. I stood there longer than I needed to, holding the curtain in one hand, the other resting absently against the windowsill. It was the first time I'd felt truly seen in a long while. Not spoken to, not complimented or observed, just seen. In that quiet, passive way, the kind that says, I've noticed the way you move through the world, and I respect how softly you do it. The paper stayed up all morning. They didn't appear on the balcony. Just that note, swaying a little each time the wind stirred, like it was breathing. I wondered what it had taken for them to put it there. How long they'd been debating it. Whether they were nervous, whether they were watching from just inside, waiting to see if I'd notice. That thought made my heart ache in a strange, slow way, that someone could be that close, that quiet, and still offer something so tender. I didn't respond. Not right away. I wasn't sure how. The unwritten rules we'd followed until now had been soft, undefined. But this was new territory. I spent the afternoon with the curtains half closed, peeking out more often than I'd admit. By evening, the note was gone. Just dawn. No sign of them, no movement, no light from the balcony door. But I'd seen it, and that was enough. The next morning, I opened the curtains at 7. 42 as usual. They were there again. Sitting with the same mug, same posture. Looking out not directly at me, but not away either. I held their gaze for a second longer than usual, then gave the smallest nod. Not dramatic, not a wave, just a quiet acknowledgement. Yes, I saw. And yes, I understand. They didn't nod back. But I didn't expect them to. The moment had already done what it needed to. Later that day, I found myself rummaging through drawers I hadn't opened in years, looking for something blank to write on. I wasn't ready to reply. Not yet. But I needed to know I could. That the door was open now. That presence could become response, if done gently enough. I found an old pad of square paper. I left it on the desk by my window. And that evening, when the sun dipped low, I looked out again. The balcony was empty. But the image of that note, white, quiet, waiting, still lingered like breath on glass. And somehow, the world felt smaller, not in a closing-in way, in a drawn-closer kind of way, like the distance between 2 quiet people had just shortened, not by miles, not by movement, but by something far more fragile, mutual permission. I waited 3 more mornings before I wrote anything, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I didn't want to say the wrong thing too soon. There's a kind of trust that builds in silence, and if you speak into it carelessly, it frays. On the fourth morning, I woke up before my alarm and watched the light stretch its way across the wall, slow and golden. I brewed coffee, let the cup warm both my hands, and sat for a long while with the blank paper in front of me. It didn't take much, just one sentence. Yes, I see you too. I folded it once, evenly, and wrote nothing on the outside. Then I set it against the window pane, gently, propped so it would be visible from across the street. I didn't wait to see if they were looking. I stepped away, left it there like a candle left burning for someone who might return. The rest of the day felt slightly untethered, not anxious, just quietly alert. Every so often I'd pass by the window, pretending to be doing something else, and glance. The paper stayed there all morning. By afternoon it was gone. I didn't see who took it. I didn't try to. But it was gone, and that was all I needed. The next morning, they were there again. Balcony, chair, coffee. And this time, they looked up. Not just into the distance, not into the air. They looked at me, just for a moment. A quiet moment. I didn't smile, neither did they. But there was something in the stillness that felt shared now. Not assumed, not accidental, chosen. That day, I went about my routine differently. I found myself more patient in small moments. I let things take their time, water boiling, people speaking, the way sunlight moved across the floor. I think something inside me had begun to slow in a way that felt more natural than deliberate. That evening, just before the light dipped low, I sat by the window with the pad of paper again. I wasn't planning to write, just sit. But a sentence came without effort. I hope your mornings are peaceful. I wrote it without thinking too much, and again left it pressed to the glass. No expectation, just a gesture like pouring tea for someone, even if you're not sure they'll drink it. The next day, nothing new appeared on their balcony. But they were there. They looked at me. This time, they nodded, just once, and then turned back to their coffee. And I understood. This wasn't going to be a conversation in the traditional sense. It was something else. A shared rhythm, a slow unfolding. And maybe that was better. Maybe, in a world full of people talking over each other, this was what real noticing looked like. Quiet, intentional, patient. After that, the notes didn't come every day. They didn't need to. We had already opened the space between us, and now we were careful with it, not out of fear, but out of respect. Like two people walking across fresh snow, each step placed with intention, knowing that silence is part of the message. Some days there was nothing on their balcony. No note, no paper, just them sitting, hands wrapped around a cup, letting the morning happen without explanation. Other days, I'd find a new message taped softly to the glass across from me, always in the same careful handwriting. They were never long, never demanding. One read, "Today feels slower than usual. That's okay." Another, "The sky is kind this morning." And one that stayed with me most, "You don't need to do anything to be welcome here." I replied just as simply, a few words at a time. My own penmanship was less graceful, a little uneven, but I tried to write like I was speaking softly. I made tea instead of coffee today. I slept badly, but the quiet helps. Are you okay? That one, I folded more carefully than the others. I left it for 2 days before placing it on the windowsill. The next morning, the balcony was empty. The note remained untouched, and I felt something small and uncertain tighten in my chest. But then, on the third day, they were there again. No paper this time, no writing, just presence. Their gaze found mine, and in place of a note, they lifted one hand and placed it gently over their heart for just a second, then returned it to their lap. And I understood that was the answer. Or maybe the question. It didn't matter. What mattered was that this, whatever this was, had started to feel like home. Not in a romantic way, not even in a familiar way, but in the way certain moments belong to you without asking for anything in return. We began to recognize each other in gestures, in timing, in the quiet choreography of ritual. If I placed a note at the window, I'd return hours later to find a small gesture in reply. A plant turned toward the light, a chair angled slightly, sometimes a candle lit in the late afternoon, even though the sun hadn't gone down yet. One day, I noticed they were wearing a sweater I hadn't seen before. Thick knit, soft beige. It looked like comfort itself. I left a note that evening that said only, "That color suits the stillness of the morning." The next day, they wore it again. We never named each other. We never gave this, whatever this was, a label. We just kept showing up in presence, in gesture, in restraint. It wasn't loneliness we were tending to. It was something else, something softer, a quiet permission to exist beside another human being without needing to explain the whole story. And in a world that so often asks us to shout, to define, to perform, this silence felt like truth. One morning, I opened the curtains and the balcony was empty. That in itself wasn't unusual. There had been days like that before. But something about this absence felt different. The chair was gone. The small table, too. The potted plant that usually leaned slightly to the left was no longer there. It was bare, not quiet hollow. I stood there longer than I normally would, waiting without admitting I was waiting. I kept hoping that maybe they were just late, or had brought the chair inside, or had forgotten to set the mug down. But hours passed, and nothing changed. The balcony, once a place of subtle ritual, now looked like any other stripped of its meaning, like the end of a stage play when the props are taken away and all that remains is space. I felt something strange and unfamiliar rise in my chest. Not panic, not sadness. Just a sudden ache, the kind you feel when something you've counted on to be quietly there no longer is. I didn't do anything dramatic, didn't leave a note, didn't try to write more than I could handle. I just stared for a while, then slowly pulled the curtain closed, unsure of whether I wanted to see again the next day. That night, I didn't sleep well. I found myself wondering who they were. Really, what had kept them coming back to that little square of space each morning, and what had finally called them away. I thought about all the things I never asked, all the things I never said because I didn't want to disturb the quiet. And now, with no more quiet left to share, I found myself craving even one more silence with them. The next morning, I opened the curtain hesitantly. Still empty. The space looked untouched. Not even dust had claimed it. I set a cup of tea by my own window and just sat. No note, no message, just presence. Maybe I was hoping they would return if I did the same things I always had. But I knew better. Some rituals are temporary, even if they feel eternal in the moment. Some people are only meant to arrive quietly, stay softly, and leave without a sound. But I couldn't let go. Not yet. That afternoon I wrote a sentence, folded it in half, taped it gently to my window. Thank you for the mornings. And then I stepped back, sat on the floor, let the light fall across the room. Nothing happened. Not that day. Not the next. I didn't remove the note. I didn't touch the curtains. I just waited, not with expectation, but with memory, with care, with a kind of mourning that doesn't ask for closure, only recognition. The balcony remained empty, and I told myself that was okay. People leave. Silence changes shape. Stillness is not always something we get to keep. But every so often, even now, I find myself looking up without thinking and for the briefest second, expecting to see them there. Just a blur of movement, a book, a hand lifting a cup, and I think some presences don't disappear. They just move further inward. The note stayed on my window for 5 days. I stopped waiting for an answer after the second. It wasn't that I gave up, just that I began to understand the difference between waiting and holding space. I left it there, not because I believed they'd see it, but because I wanted the silence between us to have something gentle in it. Something that said, I noticed, I remember, you mattered here. My mornings shifted after that. I still opened the curtains at the same time it had become too much a part of me not to. But now, the light fell into a quieter room. Not heavier, not colder, just quieter. I started sitting by the window longer, not because I hoped they'd return, but because something in me had grown still in the presence of that space. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was witnessing. One morning, I brought my notebook to the sill and wrote a single sentence. It's strange how some people become places. I didn't write anything else. I didn't need to. The feeling was enough. In the days that followed, I noticed other things more. The way the sun took longer to rise now. The way the wind pushed small leaves in slow spirals down the street. The way the world was always full of movement, even when I was sitting still. Maybe that's what they taught me. How to be still without being stuck. How to exist beside something without needing to hold it. On the 7th day, something changed. Subtle, small. I didn't see it at first, but when I stepped closer to the window, I noticed something on the balcony railing across from mine. A small object, square, flat, white. A piece of paper, folded, weighed down by a stone. My breath caught before I even knew why. I didn't move for a long time, just watched it, trying not to invent meaning too quickly. But it was there, and it hadn't been the day before. I waited. All morning no one appeared, no sign of them, no footsteps, no curtain shift. But that paper remained, and it felt like something had turned. Not everything, just a hinge inside me, quietly. I didn't write anything that day. I just sat, aware of the nearness of that little square of silence left across from me. A mirror, a reply, a possibility. The next morning, it was gone again. But this time, I didn't feel the same ache. Instead, I felt presence, like someone had come back through the smallest door they could find, just enough to say, without words, I'm still here, even if I'm not always seen. That night, I folded a piece of paper and wrote 3 words. I never stopped. I didn't sign it. I didn't explain. I placed it on the windowsill and let it rest there in the dark. I didn't know if it would be seen. That didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that the ritual was still alive. Changed? Yes. Quieter? Yes. But alive. And sometimes that's the most we can ask of anything we love, that it returns, even just for a moment, to remind us it was real. Weeks passed. Not quickly, but not slowly either. Just in that quiet rhythm, life settles into when you stop asking it to surprise you. I still opened the curtains each morning, still looked across the street. Sometimes there was something there, a plant returned, a different chair, once even a small blanket draped over the railing like someone had been out the night before and left in a hurry. But I never saw them again. Not clearly, not face to face, just traces. Moments, a light turned on at a familiar hour, the corner of a sleeve disappearing behind the curtain, the weight of someone's presence without the shape of their body. And somehow, that was enough. Or maybe it had to be, because even though I wanted more, I didn't need more to believe in what had passed between us. I still wrote, not as often, but still. Sometimes for them, sometimes for myself. I'd place the notes by the window for a day, maybe 2, then fold them into the back pages of my notebook. They became something between a memory and a continuation, like letters you send into a sky that might be listening. One of them read, "It's okay if we never speak. I already heard you." Another simply, "I hope the quiet is still kind to you. I didn't expect replies. I didn't look for signs. But the act of writing, of placing the note down, of sitting in that stillness, it anchored me. And more than anything, it reminded me of who I'd become while seeing them. More observant, less hurried, able to wait without fear of absence. There was a time when silence had frightened me, made me feel invisible or unworthy. But now, it felt like something that held weight, like a pause in music that makes everything else resonate deeper. One night, much later, I dreamed of the balcony. In the dream, it looked the same, narrow, quiet, a single light on, but instead of a note or a chair, there was just an open book lying face down on the table. And I knew, in the strange way dreams make things obvious, that the book had no ending, just pages that stopped mid-thought. And it didn't feel unfinished. It felt true. I woke up calm, like something in me had finally accepted that not all connections are meant to unfold in the way stories do. Some just arrive, hold, echo, then stay in us in a different form. That morning I didn't write a note. I didn't look for one. I just sat with my tea, quietly, and whispered not loud enough to carry across the street, but loud enough to feel thank you for teaching me how to wait without needing an answer. I don't look at the balcony every morning now, not because I've forgotten, but because I don't need to check anymore. What it gave me is already here, folded quietly into my days, like a shirt that smells faintly of someone you once knew well. The curtains still open at 7:42, out of habit, not hope. Sometimes there's movement, sometimes not. But it no longer matters in the way it used to, because they were never the destination. They were the reminder that people can become part of your rhythm without ever stepping into your space. That noticing can be a kind of love. That quiet doesn't always mean nothing is happening. Sometimes it means everything is. I kept the last note I wrote but never left. It sits tucked into a drawer now, neatly folded, written in my slower handwriting, the kind you use when you're not trying to impress anyone. Some silences don't end. They become part of the room. I think they would have understood that. Maybe they even felt it first. These days, I notice other balconies, other windows, other small signs that someone is there, holding their own quiet, hoping it means something. I don't try to recreate what I had. That wouldn't be fair to them, or to me. What happened was rare, because it was unforced. Two people seeing each other without needing names, without plans, without asking for more than presence. I walk slower now. I speak less. I listen with my full body. And in the middle of conversations, or long silences, or moments where I sit with myself and feel the shape of the air around me, I sometimes hear the echo of a note not written, not sent, but understood anyway. That's how I carry them now. Not as memory, not as story, as pause, as space, as permission. Because what they gave me wasn't an ending, it was a doorway. And I walk through it still. Every time I choose stillness over noise. Every time I let a moment pass without needing to fill it. Every time I look at someone, even a stranger, and think, you don't have to speak to be seen. So no, I don't look at that balcony every day. But some mornings, when the light hits just right and the city forgets to rush, I find myself lifting a mug to my lips, gently, without thinking and nodding just slightly, toward the quiet across the street. And it feels like a reply.